So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to start from the very beginning and walk all the way through from 0 all the way to having our water temperature done, such that we can download the data into Microsoft Excel or any of your favorite spreadsheets and graph the data. Okay? And what we're basically going to make is a water temperature probe. So what we need to get started will be our microbit, and I've already got it plugged into my USB because I need that to download. Okay? It's already connected to my laptop. An OLED screen, your water temperature probe, and if you have a LED attached to your computer, like one of the LED strips, you can have that, and you have a shield. Okay. So as always, we need to install some extensions so that the microbit will know that these peripherals and these sensors are going to be attached to my shield. So let's go install those here now. So I'm going to go to extensions. Let me move my little recording bar off. So let's go to extensions. I'm going to install a data logger. And if you've installed it before, it's all usually on your front page. But if you don't see it, you can type the word logger, and you'll get a few of them. But data logger will be the one that will pop right up. And you just click on it, and you get a little block over here that's going to allow us to data log. I'm also going to need an extension for my water temperature. And the way I kind of remember that is it's made by a company called Dallas Temperature Probe, so it's DSTemp, or sometimes I think of it as digital sensor. And you want the one temperature, so you want the one on the left, DS18B20. Okay. And you should get this little DSTemp block installed. And we also are going to need a block to control for OLED. So we're going to go to extensions again. And for that one, we need a Tinkercademy. So you just type the word Tinker. And it will be the first one that generally shows up in the top left. So Tinkercademy Tinkerkit. So you click that. Boom. And then don't forget that if you did have a LED strip, and say you were wanting to have something, maybe if the water temperature got too hot, the LED strip turned red. So maybe you wanted to have some logic and a visual representation of temperature, is that you would install the NeoPixel. So you could just type the word NeoPixel in your search box. But usually NeoPixel is always on the front screen, and you would just click NeoPixel. And there's my NeoPixel. Okay. So next step is let's start to initialize the sensors that we're going to use. So we're going to definitely use our screen. So I want to go to my OLED block. I'm going to initialize my OLED. And the little screen we're using just happens to be 128 pixels wide, 64 pixels tall, so we don't have to change these defaults. And if I did happen to have a OL or an LED strip attached, I would have to set my NeoPixel at P0, and usually the ones that we have 30 LEDs. And if you're not sure, you can just count them. Right? And it doesn't matter if you have this line or not. But if you don't have it and you have an LED strip installed on your shield, you'll get an error. So sometimes I just have it here so I don't forget if I want to use an LED strip someplace later in my code. Okay? So both of these need to go in my on start block, because these are going to run when my program starts. Okay? Now my forever block should be empty. Okay? So I had initially put them in the wrong spot. Okay? But now let's go look at my forever block. This is where it's going to be my heart of my program. Okay? So my onStart block is going to load my code I need to run my screen. It's going to run the code I need to control my LED strip if I had it. But now I need to be able to get data from my sensor and write it to my screen. So let's get a function going to collect some data. And we like to use functions to help us break the program into smaller parts. So let's make a get data function. So you can click Advanced if it's not already open. And notice when I click that little black arrow under Advanced, I get a whole set of new blocks. And if I click on Function, I can make a new function. Okay. And I can call this function getData. Okay. And there's my getData function. Okay. I'm going to drag it back closer to my forever loop over here. And what I'm going to need is I'm going to need some variable or a container to store my data. So I need to make a variable, and I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call this variable water temp. You could call it water T, water temperature, anything that makes sense to you. Okay. And then when you make that variable, notice you get some new blocks here. So I'm going to now set, which basically means I'm going to define my water temperature to be something. And right now it's set to be 0. But if I go over here to my dsTemp block, notice I've got this temperature degrees Celsius from a pin. I'm going to take that and replace that as 0. And notice the shapes are the same. And I have to make sure that I've got it on the right pin. Okay? And so I've got it on pin 1. So I have to make sure that I change that to pin 1, not leave it on pin 0. Otherwise, it might be looking for nothing or the LED strip. Okay. Now, sometimes what I do here, and this is completely optional, I sometimes like to know what's happening in my code, and I can have things show up on my screen. So sometimes I do this little trick. I sometimes go back to my OLED, and I say show string, and I put it right above my get data, and I type the words getting data. Sometimes I put a little ellipsis. I put a little pause block in, back under basics, and I just have it pause very quickly, like for half a second or 500 milliseconds. And then I have it clear the screen again. And again, if you don't have that clear block, what happens is it will write the word getting data every time it runs this function, and it'll fill up your screen. But this will just give me an indication that it's gotten to this function and it's doing something, and I'll know that it's going to be getting my data. Okay? All right, so that's one function. Now I'm also going to need a function to show the data on a screen. Okay? So I could go function. I'm going to make another function, and I'm going to say show data. Okay? All right, so this function is what's going to show the information on my little screen. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my little block, and I'm going to say, oh look, I've got my show string again. Okay? So I'm going to say show string, so I'm going to say water temp is, and I'm going to go back to that same block because I'm dealing with my OLED, and I'm going to say show number. Okay? And notice my number over here is set water temp. So I'm going to go back to my variables. Okay? And I've got a variable down here called water temp. I'm just going to drag that over here. So whatever this variable over here in my get data is, will be the number that is shown on the screen. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause that for about 2 seconds so I have time to read it. Okay? And then I'm going to clear the screen again. Okay? So that's going to be my show data function. So this is basically, if I kept cooking sensors up to these, I'll be able to just collect data to my heart's content. Okay. All right. So there's my get data, there's my show data. Now, the other function I'm going to need is my data log function, because I can store data on the memory of this microbit. Okay? So I'm going to make another function, and I'm going to call this, data log. You could call it data store data, anything that makes sense to you. I like to call my functions something also about kind of what their purpose is. So this is going to be a data log. Okay. So now, you probably have guessed it, I have to use my data log block. So I'm going to go over here to my data log block. And now there's going to be a couple of different interesting blocks we can use. Okay. So the first one, where you see where it says set timestamp, I'm going to put that timestamp to be seconds. You can change it to be minutes, hours, days. You know, maybe if you were looking at, you wanted to see something that would change over a long time period, and you wanted to just run your program and collect data over the course of a week, right? You might want to have it be in the terms of minutes or hours, because you can't store an infinite amount of data on your microbit. Right? You just can't store everything because there's only a limited amount of space on this. But we're not going to be collecting data for days, so I'm going to use seconds. Another thing we can do with our data is, see where it says mirror data to serial? That's at the very bottom. I'm going to drag that under that set timestamp seconds block, and I'm going to turn it on. All this is going to do is send the data to your computer screen. Okay? So that's going to allow you to be able to see if you're getting any data. Okay? You should also see it on your screen. Sometimes I like to see the little data stream on my computer, because that also means that it's working. That's more what it needs. Okay? Now the last thing we're going to need is we're going to need to create a data table on the microbit. And that's what this column and value block here is at the top. So I'm going to say log data, and the column is the header, or the top part of the column. So I'm going to make that to be water temp, and the value is exactly what you think it will be. It will be the variable or the data that you want to display. So you got to think of this as the top of a column, and this will be the data that fills the individual rows of the column. So if I had multiple pieces of data, I could say water temperature, data would get filled in the column. Air temperature would get filled. Humidity would get filled. Light would get filled. And it would be that type of thing. So I could have many of these, because when I go back to data logger, I can either add another one of these, or I can just click this plus icon right there, and it will add another column value, and I can just keep adding, and I would just keep adding extra columns to my data table. Okay. All right. So that's my data log. Okay. Now, the one thing we have to do is over here in my forever block, there's nothing there. I have to call all of these functions. Okay? So I'm going to go back to functions. I'm going to have to make sure I put them all in my forever loop. Right? And it's useful to get your data first, then show it, then you can data log it. Okay? Probably doesn't matter whether you data log it or show it. You know, those don't really matter, but you probably want to get it first, just so you have the data, and so you're not sending or sharing the data after you show it on the screen. You know, probably doesn't matter a whole bunch, since we're only talking about 2 to 3 seconds here. But I like this order, and I think it's a good practice to have. All right, so now you can double check everything. Right, so it's a pretty simple code overall, but this is our whole data logging, and now we've turned our microbit into a water temperature data collection probe. So instead of paying $150 for one of these things, we've basically just done it for 30 bucks. Right? The most expensive thing on the lot here is the microbit, and it's $18 right now. Okay. So let's download it. Okay. It should be downloading. Alright, so it's downloaded. And stick it in. Now I'm getting my data. Okay. It reads 24.875. Okay. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to hold my temperature thermometer, because I'm going to want to warm it up a little bit. So let's wait and collect a little bit of data here. Alright. And so when you're running your experiment, this will be setting in your water. Right? And so I'm going to see if I can warm up my water temperature probe, rub it between my hands. I'm up to 31 degrees. Alright. Alright, so now let's say I've collected enough data. How to get the data off the microbit. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to take our microbit out of our shield. That means it's going to stop collecting data, and your water temperature probe will actually go to -infinity. I'm going to unplug it. Okay. I'm going to plug it back in. Okay. And you will get a little window that will pop up that will say, oh look, here's my microbit and here's my data.html. You're going to click on that my data.html file. Okay. So let's click on that. Alright. And so anytime your microbit is not plugged into your shield, your water temperature is going to give you a -infinity reading. So what we'll do is when we download the data, we'll ignore those. So there you can see. Now the microbit can't keep time. So every time you plug it in and unplug it and download the program again, it will restart to 0. If I just plugged it back in again, it will append the data down here at the bottom, which is what just happened down here, where it's collecting my data again now. But notice it's -infinity, but it reset the time stamp to back to 0 again. Okay. So I just want kind of this first part up here. So what I can do is I can click download, and it's going to download it as a CSV file. Okay. And usually it will put it in your downloads folder, so you will find this file. So I'm just going to double click on it. It's going to open it up for me in Excel. For you, it might open it up in Excel or some other spreadsheet. Alright, here it is. Alright. And notice it doesn't know how to interpret -infinity, it just gives you name. So I'm just going to go on ahead. I want to update something. So I'm going to delete these rows that have my -infinity, because I don't want those. Okay. So this was my data, basically. Okay. So now let's graph this. So in Excel, you're probably going to go up to highlight the 2 columns, and then you go up to insert. You go over to where you have charts, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a scatter plot. Right. And generally you'll do either a scatter plot that looks like the little dots, or if you want to do one that has the lines, to complete the lines, that's completely up to you. Kind of depends on what you're wanting. And now you'll be able to get your data. Okay? And you have the actual raw data here. Right, my starting point was 24.875, and my temperature was 35.4 at the end. Okay. And if you don't want these guys, you can round those. You can either round them here in Excel, or you can go back into your make code and you can go to math, and you can just take this round function and go over here to where you're collecting the data and just drag the round block and round the data at the instant you collect it. So if you don't want all those decimal points, you can just round it right at the very beginning. You don't have to deal with it. But now I've got my data. Right, so you can make this graph pretty, right, as you see fit. But now we've got a data trend. Okay? And now if I wanted to get new data, right, what I'll do is, instead of just putting my data back, the microbit back into my shield, is you probably will want to clear out data, or you can just have it appended. But if you wanted to just wipe all your data, now that you've got it downloaded, just re-download the file, and that will clear the old data out, and it will start with the new data. Okay? And now when I stick it back in, I'm going to be collecting new data again.